So if I could introduce our second group of panelists, please. It's Fred Jones and Phillip Darnton and Sergeant Steve Wilson. So starting with Phillip. Good morning, great to see you.
Good morning to you.
So Phillip is chair of the Bicycle Association, which represents major retailers of bicycles and also e-scooters in many cases. So you have an expertise about the vehicle and both the bicycle and the e-scooter sector, and you've contributed a lot to this project, so thank you ever so much. Fred Jones from TIA, Vice President and General Manager for Europe, I think, if I have that right. Or anyway, I mean, I just want to say how PACTS has been really fortunate to have TIA's input, Fred's support, and technical expertise. We've really learned a lot because nobody knows, about the vehicles, about what's going on as much as the operators. So, and especially, and I think TIA, is it the largest European operator?
That's correct, yeah.
And of course, you have the rental schemes in London and York and elsewhere. So, thanks very much for joining us today. And Sergeant Steve Wilson, who is also London, of course, the Metropolitan Police, head of the cycle project team, and virtual reality. You'll have to tell us what that means. But I think the cycle project team has been given the task of taking enforcement action against illegal e-scooter use. So, big welcome, Steve. Fred, could I just sort of kick off with a question to you? You've been operating in Europe for some years. How's the design of your scooters evolved?
Significantly, actually. Next time you have to come down to our London warehouse, because we've actually got all the models lined up next to each other, and it's a really powerful kind of visual representation of just the level of innovation here. And safety's been a big driver of that. So when we started just over 3 years ago, the scooters we used were actually largely kind of ones comparable to private scooters at the moment. So typically all the issues we've just heard about: small wheels, no suspension, very light, single brakes, etc. We're now on our probably our 6th iteration, and it's really evolved remarkably into what is actually quite a serious light vehicle. So big changes have been around the wheel size. So the front wheel on a TIA scooter is 12 inches, just over 30 centimeters. We have dual shock suspension on those wheels to cope with uneven surfaces. We have dual handbrakes and a third brake on the back wheel drum. The vehicle's now around 36 kilograms, which provides much greater stability on uneven surfaces. Obviously got lights front and back, always on, indicator lights to help you kind of maneuver with traffic and keep your hands on the handlebars when turning. And then also we've evolved as well. We have the option for integrated helmets, so a smart box on the stem that we put a foldable crash helmet in, and users can access that for free on every trip as well. So huge amount of evolution over a short period of time, and that's going to continue.
Fred, thank you. That's fascinating. It's worth saying that the construction regulations that we've recommended in the report Margaret ran through, many of them we've sort of picked up from your latest design. So that's been really helpful. Philip, there's lots of questions or challenges about whether e-scooters are really just like bikes and they should be permitted, authorized, legalized, just like bikes. And people often say, well, we have electric assisted pedal cycles already, which are regulated like bikes. What's the difference? Would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. David, perhaps to make the first point that the Bicycle Association represents the whole of the cycle industry, manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, retailers. And as you say, some of the members of the Bicycle Association are retailers who do legally sell e-bikes. There are some members, I'm quite certain, of the Bicycle Association who would see e-scooters as quite risky and dangerous. And so the Bicycle Association itself has taken so far a fairly neutral position about whether e-scooters are a good thing or a bad thing, but are united in the view that if they are legalized, they must be as safe as they possibly can be. And I think your the paper has two very good charts in it. One is about e-scooters and their not being like electrically assisted pedal cycles, and one is about how private e-scooters are not like hire e-scooters. And I think that Fred has made the point extremely well, that the amount of thought, care and attention that's gone into the evolution of the design of hired e-scooters is formidable. And it's also, of course, reinforced by the fact that local authorities in their negotiations with e-scooter hire companies can make their own additional, if they wish, constraints. Geofencing is one of them. And because it's a commercial enterprise, it's in the interest of the supplier to meet those requirements. So that everything conspires together with a hire e-scooter to work in the direction of greater safety. Insurance has been mentioned, helmets just been mentioned. And none of this applies to a private e-scooter. The appeal of a private e-scooter must in large measure be because it's very cheap. And the very cheapness of it is something which, of course, means that you are not going to look carefully at things like speed and whether it's easy to tamper with the nominal speed of the e-scooter. You're not going to be in a position to talk about power or the weight, or as we've just heard, crucially, the wheel size, which is not just about stability, but it's also about hitting potholes and being tossed off, or indeed about the clearance of the underside of the deck of the scooter to the road if the wheels are only 8 inches. Clearly, the going over any kind of hump or lump is going to affect the stability of the scooter. So if we are going to look at the legalization of private e-scooters, speed, power, weight, wheel size, brakes, lights, audible warning, geofencing all have to be considered. But every one of those would add cost. And I think the dilemma that presumably a government is now facing is that private e-scooters have become extremely popular. There are a very large number, as we've said, at least 800,000 of them in use at the moment. And probably you have to ignore those if you're going to make some new regulations and start afresh. But the real dilemma is between cost and safety. And I think that the comparison with electrically assisted pedal cycles, there's a very good chart in the report which summarizes those, and they really, really are not similar at all. The key point being that pedal cycles and electrically assisted pedal cycles are exempt from type approval. If e-scooters are not regulated, then we will have the same situation in terms of safety as we have now going forward. And the whole question, therefore, of e-scooters is one about the necessity to have some very clear specifications which are then enshrined in type approval of the vehicle.
Philip, thanks very much. Can I turn to Steve Wilson now? I mean, Steve, you pick up, I suppose, the most difficult end of much of this. Well, that's not, of course, not playing down the NHS hospital side of things, but the police are often criticised for not enforcing the rules, and I'm sure we usually defend you, saying that the police are doing their best, But anyway, how was your perspective on all this?
Yeah, so we obviously have been dealing with these since about 2019. when they first came to the spotlight of safety when we had that first fatality. So I run the cycle safety team because these vehicles occupy a lot of the same space in the road surface as a bicycle. They came to my team, and we developed the approach and the practice. So what started out with a graduated approach, where very early in those early days we would warn and educate and try and get more information out there. There were some logistical issues around the terminology that was used. We were using e-scooters. The central government would refer to them as powered transporters. It meant finding the information could be quite difficult. If you didn't search for one, you couldn't on the right terminology and the right organisation's website, you wouldn't find the same information. So getting that coordinated and together, making sure that we're all referring to them in the same way, is a big step to doing that. And then over time, we moved towards enforcement. So in last year, 2021, the Met seized 3,987 e-scooter devices. And unfortunately, due to the way our data capture is made, we can't provide any information about tickets where they weren't seized, because they just get lost in the information system as they're recorded as mechanically propelled vehicles. So they get lost in there at that point. We know how many we seized because we can count them. So that's how many we seized last year. That's up from the previous year of 287. So a big increase in the amount of enforcement. But also, as I said, we've got limited resources, more limited than ever, a lot of responsibility to do. So it's about, for my team, that's not just coming from my team, that's coming from all officers. My team operates as subject matter experts. We go out to those teams and those boroughs where it's happening, and we upskill the local officers and make sure they understand the powers and the procedures that they need to follow in order to deal with these. We share resources wherever we can, or we put teams in contact with other teams so they can work together and make a big impact over a short period of time. In the month that we launched the actual trial in London, we did do a targeted week of action, which saw 500 scooters seized in that 1 week alone. So we know they're out there. And we were very concerned when the trial would launch, that people would think that all those times they put them back in the cupboard, that they would get them back out and decide to just chance it now that there are legal scooters on the road. So to dissuade them, we did a targeted week of action. And moving forward, our action will only be sporadic and localized where issues are doing it, but it's always available to officers as a course. I will say you will absolutely see sometimes police vehicles going past them because they are on their way to deal with something else. We can never really account for what they are doing at that specific time. So there will be times when they go for it. We also do have and do experience some issues around stopping these devices. They are difficult to stop, they are fast, they are nimble. We've got to look after officers' safety. We do get a number of officers that are injured in the attempt to stop these, where the rider either doesn't or intentionally rides towards the officer or doesn't get out of the way to try and force the issue. And we've had issues where officers are injured. Tested a number of devices to make sure that moving forward, if they do have a future on the road space, that we are equipped to deal with them. This takes time. As Fred will tell you, the technology can move incredibly fast, which means that we have to try and be faster to catch up and make sure that what we've got is suitable. And the most important thing is, if we are going to stop these, that we do so safely. We've got an obligation to make sure that even if this person is doing something wrong, that bringing them to justice doesn't put them at unnecessary risk. We can't harm people to bring them to safety where unnecessarily. So yeah, we do that, and that is always constantly under review. As I said, I help alongside David with the work that PACTS has done and a number of different organisations to make sure that we are listening and hearing what they have to say, and as much as we are able to absorb that into the way and the approach that we take regarding e-scooter micromobility enforcement.
So one of the questions in the chat, and it reflects one of our recommendations about tampering and uprating them effectively. It featured in the BBC report this week. Fred, well, any of you really, any sort of comments about whether that should or could be effectively prevented through technology, apart from legislation? So
I'll let Fred take the first.
Yeah, cheers, Steve. Yeah, I mean, obviously, for lots of reasons, safety, good business practice, because we don't want people stealing our equipment and moving it elsewhere. We make it very hard to tamper a TIA scooter. Everything from all the cables are inserted within the chassis to how the chassis is designed, the IoT, which is kind of the brains of the scooter, that's embedded as well. and these are designed specifically to work with our technology. And so, someone can try and get into it, but they can't repurpose it for private use or anything like that. So there's really very little. There's no value of a tier scooter on the kind of private market, and that wouldn't be able to be repurposed for that.
When it comes to private use, there is as I've mentioned before, there is a capability to, for lack of a better term, chip or hack these devices to make them go in excess of the speeds that they've been manufactured with intended to do. This is because a lot of the time the software in it, unlike Fred's tier system that will be proprietary and protected, is not. It's open source. It's manually adjustable. You do not need much technical knowledge to be able to piece together how to do it. And the reality is the way to enforce that would always have to be an officer at the time. I would be reluctant to tell an officer to test it manually and to ride a device that's not verifiably safe in order to ascertain that, which means then if there is a future legislation, it needs to come with the correct raft of powers to ensure that officers can stop, test and inspect these devices to make sure they're compliant with any future legislation. Because if we can't verify that it hasn't been tampered with, then how can we enforce it? It can't always be taking it away to a lab location to have it tested. It wouldn't be practical. It wouldn't be financially viable to test these scooters in huge numbers to make sure they've not been tampered with.
Can I make a comment, David?
Yeah, go.
Just to say that, of course, one of the considerations there, and Steve is, of course, quite right. If you are determined to tamper with something, it's probably not stoppable. And the EU are working very hard on this whole question of tampering with electric vehicles at the moment. But the recommendations that we make are about power, limit the power to 250 watts. And this is entirely about private scooters. And Fred is quite right about hire scooters. It doesn't really apply. But the more that you allow that power rating to increase, not only do you increase things like acceleration or the easiness of carrying a second person, ostensibly, oh yes, it'll be much better up hills, you are also, of course, increasing the speed at which it will go when tampered with. So keeping the power rating down to 250 watts, which was actually the recommendation of the Bicycle Association to the Select Committee, but was overruled, is very important, and it has a direct bearing on this whole question of the speed with which and the acceleration of the vehicle.
Thank you. I think we're drawing towards the end of the time for this session. I wonder if I could just get a quick question to Fred, given that you have experience of operating in a number of countries. The UK seems to be, I think based on information that Phillip's given us, unique in having so many private scooters. The experience of more other countries is it's primarily rental. Is that how you see it? And is there any can you see any reason for that?
I think I don't have the hard data, but it does seem to be the case. I can only kind of hypothesize as to why that might be. And one of them could be that actually we've been relatively late to introducing the shared schemes. That has benefits because, frankly, the way the UK is thinking about it has now one of the most sophisticated regulatory regimes and safety mechanisms, and other countries are now looking at the UK on how to regulate their shared schemes. But a downside for that is, in the absence of it, clearly scooters are very popular for people, sustainable way of getting around their towns and cities. And so in the absence of a shared scheme and legal scheme they can use, they've gone and purchased their own.
I suppose the question is, would more rental schemes reverse that trend, or as Steve I think said earlier, once the rental schemes launched, then more people bought more private ones?
Yeah, I mean it's a hard one to say. I mean, I think the tier, not in the UK and other markets, we provide different rental models. So you can do a long-term rental scooter that is kind of lighter, foldable, suitable if you live further out of town. The advantages of that is we still kind of know who it's registered to, it's maintained, it's repaired, people can return it to us, we can keep the vehicle in good health, we have our standards, like it still has indicators and larger wheels. So it's not like for the shared models, but there are different ways we can address consumer need in a way that I think enhances the safety to what we have in the UK right now.
David, I'll just jump in there. Just there is a research paper out of Paris that did show that in areas where the standards between the private and the rental are similar, that more people tend to use a rental one because of the convenience to pick up and purchase, not that they're having to store it at home, not having to charge it. So at the moment, it is highly possible that the appeal to the private is the fact that they are faster. They have all of the things that aren't regulated. They're not trackable because as someone has put in the thing at the moment, private scooters don't have any way to recognize past the event. So they have no license plate, they have no tracking number, they have no serial numbers. One of the things we did with the trial was to make sure that that is not the case. They are trackable, not just with the GPS, but with a physical plate that allows someone to report incorrect riding. As you start to see in those countries where legalization is taking place and some of those features start to mirror, you do see some people that just won't buy their own one because I use it infrequently. I'm not going to use it in the wet weather, so I will rent one when it's convenient for me, and I won't have one when it's not. We also filter out a lot of the poor quality cloned or copied designs that are copying sometimes bad designs. Like what Fred said, those first designs were terrible, but they are still out there in the private market with back wheels, back brakes that are you stand on the back wheel, and that is the only brake that is present on the device. They're still out there. They're poor quality. Lithium-ion batteries can be dangerous, never more so than when they are poor quality, poorly made, horrendously wired devices. We've seen the pictures that are available on YouTube of them failing and bursting into flame. That is happening. You need good construction methods and good, a standard for all those construction methods.
Steve, we could continue this again a lot longer, and I'm sure there will be further webinars and conferences and all sorts of stuff on this. And we've recommended the government should do further consultation. So thanks for pointing out that Paris paper. Just interesting that Adam Norris this week has again, Adam Norris, who runs Pure and one of the major retailers of private electric scooters, has recommended they should be registered and insurance should be compulsory. So that's a step that PACTS didn't take in its report. We said that'd be anyway. So it's interesting that other people are suggesting those things, people in the industry. Okay, well, look, Fred and Steve and Philip, thank you ever so much, and I'm sure we'll continue this conversation with you. A big thanks for helping. And if you can answer any of the questions in the chat, with a few good questions there, then I'm grateful. But I must move now to our next panel. So thank you.